Hello everyone, this is Alex, and today we are doing some orchestral voicing. A lot of my students and beginner composer I know have no idea how to voice a chord for a full orchestra. And although on YouTube there's some bits of information here and there as to how to voice a chord, there's not like a strict approach covering all sections, strings, woodwinds, and brass, and explaining how to just make a chord sound nice. So in this video, I'm just gonna focus on this one chord. I can guarantee you that just focusing on this one chord can really help you to understand how orchestral voicing works. And afterwards, well, it's like magic. You can follow this, and even though you have some melodies and some things that are moving, if you follow this guideline and just generally don't differ too much away from it, your music would sound balanced, and whatever chord you use within it, you can then bring out the emotion and cinematic depth of your music. Also note that this first approach to orchestral voicing is just a first step to orchestration. If you want to see more video about orchestration and building step by step your orchestral sound, well, I have quite a lot of these on my channel, so I invite you to check them out. Alright, so let's start with the basics. We got our strings here. The first violin, second violin, viola, cello, and double bass. All of them are essential to the string orchestra, so they all need to be there and considered for this. If we go up to the woodwinds, I'm gonna show you the basic woodwinds that I always use, always have in my orchestration, or at least always have available. So the most basic one are flute 1 and 2, oboe 1 and 2, clarinet 1 and 2, and bassoon 1 and 2. Then I always want to have their extra instrument from their section. So it's like there are 3 players playing flute, but one of them is playing the piccolo. And then same thing for the oboe, one of them is playing the English horn. And then the 3 clarinets, one of them is playing the bass clarinet. And then the 3 bassoons, one of them is playing the contrabassoon. I think these extra range for the woodwinds are very important in modern scoring. It just makes the whole section much more independent and a lot more flexible. It can do a lot of different things. So these are the instruments I'm going to use for the woodwinds today. Then for the brass, I have horn 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 3 trumpets. I have 2 tenor trombones and 1 bass trombone and 1 tuba. So these are pretty standard as well in a medium to large scale orchestra. And then finally for the percussions, I just decided to use the timpani because it's a pitch percussion and to actually show you how it can really be part of the brass section itself. So for this voicing exercise, you want to ask yourself first, what register is going to be important for my orchestra there? Is it something that's going to be a little bit more in the higher register with lots of notes close to each other, and then just maybe one note in the medium low register? Or is it going to be something super stacked in the low register with almost nothing on top? So this is always very relevant, and it's already a great indicator into what's going to be playing in my orchestra and what's not going to be playing. You're not going to use a flute here on this D because it's really in the lowest register of the flute. And if you're using like low trombones down here and then the double bass, surely you cannot hear the flute there. So already planning on what register your music is going to be in, you can already make these decisions. So for me today, I want to use an E minor chord. So I'm just going to write for E like this, so 3 octaves. And for a full orchestral tutti, I always want to start with my strings. So making my strings feel right and putting them in the position that I want my texture to be in is always my first move. So if we put our first violin up here, then we can surely say that down here we can have our second violins. And down here, maybe the viola, and all the way down here, the cello. But now what if I want this to be an E minor chord? And so I just got 4 fundamentals, and I got 5 group of instruments. So now I need to add in my third, which is the G, and then my fifth, which is the B. So something I like to do here is start from the bottom. So this is going to be a very dense chord in the lower register like this, and then maybe just a fifth up here. This is a very okay voicing, but for me here, I just really want the sound to be really clear, and this low fifth can sound very dense in the texture. If you want something that is more clear and spaced out in the sound, you generally want to leave more space in the lowest register and put notes closer to each other in the upper register. So this is what I'm gonna do here. So I got my fifth up here, and let's see here, we got second violin, maybe. We say there's the viola, maybe I send the viola up here. and then my cello here, and then of course I got my double bass, which could be playing the lower register. But now something's missing, my third. So I got an octave between my cello and double bass. Then we got a big octave also again between cello and the viola. And then I got my group of fifth and a fourth. So this is fine, but now where do I put it my third? So I could have the choice of maybe sending one note down here, but this would not be a great voicing because you got such a big space in the middle. You generally don't want to have space in the middle. A basic ground rule is that you can have more space between the bass line and the rest of the voices. So the bass line is my E. Some could say, well, your bass line is the double bass. No, actually the bass line is the cello, in my opinion here. The double bass gives a little bit of sub frequencies, but when you get an octave like this, the cello actually represents the highest note from the bass line. So that means that you can take this G and send it up here. So this means you would have a tenth between the cello and the viola, which is quite fine. And even the fact that we consider that we're gonna add the rest of the instruments of the orchestra, it might be a way to bridge a gap between these two sections. So we could think to add more notes in between as we add on more instruments. So for now, that would be a basic voicing for this. So notice the first violin is not quite high. You know, the first violin can play up here if you want, but here it's a more controlled sound, I would say, if you're making a chord in that area, and it's going to be just clear and comfortable for everybody in the orchestra, every string player, and it's just going to sound easy. So that's what I'm looking for today, just something easy. And now notice that I'm choosing this chord, but I could just decide to take it down a fourth below, so that would be a B minor, and it would be quite the same for this. All of the instruments can also play these notes, so the cello can play these, double bass can play this low note, etc. But here, just for the sake of this exercise, I'm choosing E minor. So everything that I'm showing you here, you can use it with chords that are in that area, a little bit higher, a little bit above, but maybe not like 2 octaves below, because then the double bass cannot play this, the cello cannot play this, and well, there's too many lines. I can't even read these notes. Okay, so now we're moving on to the woodwinds. So for the woodwinds, I like to start with things that are more obvious. So the extreme registers. So we can ask ourselves, the cello and the double bass, who's going to play this lowest register? Certainly the bassoon, the contrabassoon, and we have a bass clarinet in there, so the bass clarinet is going to be around this area too. So we can already place them in there. So contrabassoon is a great instrument to double the double bass. It's really has the same function in the woodwind section. And that's why I love this instrument so much, because without the contrabassoon, we're just have the bassoon, that's the lowest instrument. And the bassoon is more of a tenor instrument like the cello, but the contrabassoon can really go deep in the sound and add a lot of support for the rest of the woodwind section. So we have the contrabassoon. The bass clarinet could be here too. We have 2 options. It could be here or it could be up here. I'm deciding to send it up here just for the other clarinets to be more linked to its sound. Remember, the bass clarinet is the same family as the clarinets, so they should be tied up a little bit together. And you'll see also I'm adding the bassoons 1 and 2 on this E here, which is a perfect voicing to me, because you're pairing the cello and the bassoons together and the contrabass and the contrabassoon together. So we're doing both doublings similarly in each of the families. So now I can imagine my bass clarinet being on this E, and then my clarinets 1 and 2 on maybe notes that are closer around here. But before we get to that, let's just double our notes here. So we got our flutes. I would say my flute 1 and 2 can be with our first violin. We can also say that this B is great for the oboe, and then this G is great for our clarinets. So let's bring our clarinets together. So this makes sense. We have our bass clarinet here. Maybe I could have used like 1 clarinet down here. This would actually be fine. So this would be a new note that I would add in. But then the voicing here is a little bit weird, but I considering that I'm sure that I will be finding a way to add this E down here. Now let's think about the extra instrument that I have. I have my contrabassoon, I got my piccolo. Now the piccolo, this E is quite low for this instrument. We will not really hear it. So in that case, I like to use a first octave doubling, extending the range of the sound. So simply a I, E above here, and this would be my piccolo. But now you will say, oh, Alex, you told us not to have too much space in the upper register or whatever. Now there is a space, okay, there is a space, but this space is here because the piccolo is actually just supporting this E from the flute. It's just adding this upper partial in the sound. So just a little bit of light in the sound. And we don't need to add in all of these notes, this G and this B. We don't need to add these because then the sound will become much thicker suddenly, a lot more complex. But me, I want to stay within this certain timbre, this certain area, and I just want to use my piccolo to add a little bit of light in the upper register. So then this makes sense. Now I have my English horn. I like to use generally so this is my oboe note here. So I like to use the English horn generally an octave lower than my oboe. Octaves between this cousin instrument, like I'm doing here with the flute and the piccolo, and then here with my English horn. It makes for a great voicing within the woodwind section. And also we're doing this with the bassoons and the contrabassoons. So it just ties things up together. It's something that I like to use a lot. So now maybe I could consider sending this clarinet here down here, actually. This would be even better, in my opinion, because then we have a bunch of doublings everywhere. And we consider that this E here will be given to somebody else. Okay, so now we got our strings on one side and our woodwinds on the other side. How are we gonna voice the brasses now? So again, starting with the higher and upper register of the section is always a good start. So this low note here, the E, we already got the contrabassoon, the contrabass, and in the brass section, there's one instrument that can play this kind of low register as well. It's the tuba. So the tuba is a very beefy sound, so we're gonna use it for this. Also, we add our bass trombone. So let's say we add in our bass trombone as well on the same note. Note that the tuba can play pretty low. It can play this instrument here. And generally the bass trombone and the tuba are great in unison and are great in octaves as well in certain register. But here I just want a control sound. I don't want notes that are too deep. The contrabass and the contrabassoon can also play this low E. It's just very, very, very low. And I still want to focus the sound, the energy in my sound around this area within the treble and the bass clef. Now something we can add here would be a timpani. So we got the timpani that can play this low instrument. We could use the timpani again on the IE. I just think sometimes timpanis that are pitched a little bit too high, you don't necessarily get as much oomph in the sound. Down here it's almost like a bass drum, but you still hear a pitch. So that's something I like to use a lot. And I like these type of big voiced tutti to have a lot of instruments on my lowest sound, and especially if it's not such a low note. So the E is perfect for all of these instruments, and they will provide clear sound because it's also in a comfortable register for these. Okay, so if we go up then, surely this IE could be performed by first trombone or second trombone. So I would say second trombone if I'm considering maybe one of these higher notes to be for my first trombone. So let's say this B would be for my first trombone. And now what else we got? We got trumpets and we got horns. So first the trumpets, I would say, because the trumpets to me is pretty obvious here. You got three trumpets, so I would just double all of these notes here. So again, the E here should be my highest note, and the piccolo doesn't count, like I said, because it's just an upper partial of this E. So I'm not going to do a higher note. I'm not going to add in stuff here. So I would put the trumpet 1 here. We could put all 3 trumpets here, but it would be a little bit disbalanced. Especially it's just we have our 2 flutes here, we have our 2 oboe here, then 1 clarinet here with our violas. We want to keep some balance within it. So trumpet 2 would be here on the B, and then a third trumpet on the G. So in this section, we complete our chord. We got a great link with our trombones here that are just a sixth apart, and then going down to a fifth below, and then going down an octave below. So almost like the strings are hard brass, and hard brass are the trumpets, trombones, and tuba. They cover the essence of the music, of the chord, of the voicing of the chord. So for the horns, now I'm looking at what's missing. So we got this G, would just be played by the clarinet, like one clarinet alone. It's quite exposed. So let's say we put our horn 3 and 4 here. And then if we look at what's missing, these 3 notes are well balance, and we get a lot of support on it. We get the hard brass on this B, we get the hard brass on this one as well with the cello. And what's missing to me is an extra E here to just complete the whole chord. So that would be just horn 1 and 2 in unison. So just the 2 of them on this note here. So let's have a listen at all 3 sections independently, and then I'll make you hear all of them together. So you see that through this old process, I respected the fact that at first I was going for this register, so this chord in this area. So only adding my octaves in the upper and lower register to add in a little bit of light on top and a lot of support underneath. But yet what we hear the most in this sound are these notes actually. Now again, if you take this chord a little bit higher, let's say to a minor, it's also going to be fine. All of these voicing can still fit for these instruments. If you're taking down a fifth below, it's also fine, but do consider that some instruments you might hear them a little bit less. The flute is just one example. Maybe the horns a little bit in the lowest register, but otherwise you should be fine. And you can make some minor adjustment into this. If you want to send these a major third below, then maybe you can leave this upper flute here, and then just have your violin and trumpet 1 go down here to the C actually. So to take that into consideration with this grid, it's just a starting guide for you to get set onto how you voice your next chord or your next piece of music when you're doing an orchestral tutti like this. Because let's say this is my first chord, and then my second chord is this here. So let's say this contrabass and contrabassoon can go down here with the tuba, the bass trombone. The timpani cannot go play here. So maybe the timpani can go up here. You can start from here and send these instruments in different direction. It's totally fine. They don't all have to follow the same line all the time, actually. But you do see here in this upper register, there's a little bit more space around here. It's just a more spaced out chord. And you don't necessarily want to voice maybe this first chord with the B and sending it all the way up to the A or to the C here. It doesn't make for such a nice line for your oboe. So then if your B is not going to go to the I C, maybe your flute's going to go up here. And then this is a bit high and shrill for the trumpet. And we want something a little bit more controlled. So maybe keep the E at the same register and just repeat the note. This is something you have to take into account with the different registers of the different instruments. And then in the example, the E from the horn, you can leave it here. If you want your horn to suddenly stand out, you send it up to the A, which is a little bit higher register for the instrument. But don't set it up to here, because the horn here is super intense. It's not made for that. It's going to stand out a lot. Consider the extreme register for each instrument And if everybody's in their extreme register, in the highest register, well, it's fine. Send them all that way. But if there's just one that's in this register that's super tense, well, we're going to feel it in the texture. And maybe that's something you might want. Maybe I have a very high bassoon that's playing this high tenor sound that's very tense, while all the other instruments are more in the back doing something more comfortable. I'm just saying if you want to something more homogeneous sound. So what we're doing today is to simply take this orchestral voicing and see if it can fit a whole section of a piece with the melody and chords. So for this exercise, I chose none other than Hedwige's themes from John Williams in Harry Potter, and see that this first note, E, is the one that I had for my voicing. So this was all planned. And for this, I simply started with the whole string orchestra, and I give them exactly the notes that I had in my voicing exercise. After that, I had the first violin play the whole melody, and then the cello and double bass play the bass line, which is basically a pedal note of E, and just changing for A sharp around here, and then back on the E at the end of this phrase section. So it was up to the second violin and the viola to complete the notes from the chords. So I made them move a little bit, play a little bit with the melody and harmonize for my viola. So just a simple music for strings for this, a simple harmonization, but it's all based on the voicing guide that I gave you earlier. So let's have a listen. Well, it already sounds good and well balanced. There's no problem here. So let's go see our woodwinds now. So our woodwinds are also following the exact same voicing that we had earlier. If we compare with our strings, our flutes are doubling the first violin. The piccolo is actually sound an octave higher than written, is doubling at the octave, giving a little bit of light in the upper register. And then our oboe are doubling the violins, the clarinets are doubling the viola, and then our English horn is doubling the oboe an octave lower. And then we have with the bass line, the bass clarinet, the bassoon doubling the cello, and the contrabassoon doubling the double bass. So again, this is the voicing we plan. Let's see if it works, the woodwinds and the strings. Again, pretty well balanced, isn't it? It looks like the planning we made earlier with the voicing and making sure that everything was in place paid off. So what about the brass section? We have the timpani, tuba, bass trombone doing this lowest line from the double bass. Just long notes. We have the trombones. The lowest trombone is doubling the cello, and the highest trombone is somehow doubling the English horn, actually, with a little bit less movement. Then they're joining together on the A sharp here, and then back to this voicing that we plan. Now my three trumpets are simply doubling first violin, second violin, and viola. And then my horns are adding a few extra notes. This is something we did with the voicing. And then we're just following these lines. So let's have a listen now to the whole orchestration. So pretty crazy that by just planning the voicing at first, all of the rest of the music falls in place and it sounds balanced even though everybody's playing. It doesn't sound heavy. And this is all because I followed this voicing plan that I made. So I want to say this is a little bit big orchestration with like lots of notes and lots of instruments. I'm usually doing things that are more subtle, and you can see all of them in the playlist that's around here somewhere. So I invite you to go check them out. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.